agenda, which was emailed to you. Appreciate, we welcome a motion to accept the agenda as presented.
So moved, Your Worship.
So moved by Councillor Now, seconded by Deputy Mayor Noss. Do you have a question, CAO?
Oh, just wanted to remind you, if you ever want me to put anything up on the screen, just let me know.
Okay. How about an 8x10 glossy of a nice vacation spot with a warm beach?
I shouldn't have said anything. I can put the agenda up.
Do you want to put the agenda up for the folks for our visitors to see? It's
Sure, I'll do that
relatively
just for a
brief
moment.
in terms of our usual agendas. While he's doing that, I'll remind everyone that if you wish to speak to the folks around the council table, I'm talking about the people who are in their council roles, just indicate that you would like to do so. So we have 4.1 to 4.6, some staff reports to council on a variety of items relevant to the budget, beginning with the strategic plan annual review, which was deferred from February 27th. Thank you, CAO.
Welcome.
Would you like to make some opening comments on the strategic plan issue?
Well,
Carver,
oh, go ahead.
you're on mute, Councillor Carver. You're on mute, Councillor Carver. No? Bottom left-hand side of the screen.
Yes, have we voted on the agenda?
No.
No, we have not. All in favor? Motion's carried. CAO?
Thank you. Good catch, Councillor Carver. So as far as the strategic plan, the staff report is just a presentation of the most up-to-date report on the implementation of the strategic plan as of the date that it was presented. So it's about a month old now, but I think that provides a pretty complete summary. So if council has any questions about what's presented there are a few areas where we're clearly on target, where we've completed the objectives that council had in mind. There are a couple that are still in progress. It is a strategic plan till 2021, so most of the remaining objectives are within this fiscal year, and that I think was council's intention based on the term of the council. So the review tonight I think would focus on what we could get done within the rest of this year, and whether any of the objectives are realistic, unrealistic, or whether there's anything missing that council would like to add.
Okay. The strategic plan itself, which we've been working on for the last 3 years, the current iteration, are there any issues or amendments that you would have us consider for the strategic plan?
As far as,
Carver.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to, two things. I'd like to check how are we going to respond to the suggestions that are marked in the green areas of the strategic plan. And I also have something that I would like to tweak in the economic and community development section.
Okay. Would you like to go to that section now, Councillor Carver?
Yes. It would be under the
3.2?
Sorry, it's hard to find it. The section that starts preserve and enhance the community value and use of our heritage, harbor, and green spaces through economic development decisions. That item was added or tweaked last year in 2019, and I was never comfortable with the idea of linking the green spaces and taking care of the green areas in the community through economic development decisions. It seemed like a contradictory concept. So I would like to find a way to separate those two. And one option would be to move the items around protecting the green spaces down to the last category, which is the greenhouse, the environmental sustainability. So that would, I'm just suggesting that as an option. Otherwise, retweaking the whole way that that's phrased, putting the preservation and enhancement in terms of economic decision making.
Who's missing?
Yeah, that strikes me as a good idea, Councillor Carver. I know you've spoken on that point before. So I think that was always something that language was always a little bit mysterious, and I think could use some tweaks to your point. It seemed to me we hashed this out about 7 or 8 months ago, at least had a conversation about this around the council table, but my sense of things, it's wordsmithing. But I think that's a good recommendation to move it.
Councillor Carver, are you thinking of, if you took that phrase, optimize value and use of our heritage, harbor and green spaces, and move that down to the bottom of environmental sustainability? Given it's not something that's the unique purview of the Economic Development Committee.
No, I see it more as the sustainability. I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time finding the sections in the.
And just a reminder, if we ever want anything on the screen, just let me know. I have it up here.
No, I have a screen here, but it's just a matter. I'm a paper person, remember. Because we have other projects going on now that are really highlighting the value of the green spaces in the community. I think this is an opportunity to include a statement about creating a plan that will preserve and protect, enhance and develop trails and parks and green spaces, and that could be included as partnered with the sustainability and greenhouse gas projects, as well as the Blue Route discussion and active transportation. So that the emphasis would be on creating, that we would undertake to create a plan.
Anyone have a comment? Councillor O'Neill?
I'm in support and wonder if this is a motion that Councillor Carver is making this evening.
Just before we get into a motion, I just wanted to clarify, writing along here for the changes. So Penny, you identified the section that's under economic development right now that references green spaces, and all of the actions under that section actually pretty much reference the harbor development and water. So was your thought to retitle the harbor stuff and leave the harbor stuff where it is and create another section that references green spaces, or did you want to move the harbor stuff down to sustainability as well? I could see either point. I just wasn't clear on that.
I'm willing to do it either way, that just so that it's clarified and highlighted as and made more specific. I'm happy to take your guidance, Mr. CAO, on the which way would work better, or other people, other councillors.
I think the harbor could fit under environmental sustainability. You know, in the past, we have both. I think we have an environmental motive around the harbor. We also have an economic development motive around the harbor.
Yep.
If there's an interest in making sure that there is some reference to the economic value of the harbor in the strategic plan, this existing point could be repurposed to that, and you could still make reference to harbor sustainability and
Yeah.
water quality down below under environmental sustainability.
And I think, in fact, that would be my preference, to see it under environmental sustainability. And with a clearer statement about that we're working on a plan.
Okay. So are we comfortable with initiating that change? I would propose that we would ask staff if there's a consensus tonight on the change, to make that change to the text of the plan. And at the first opportunity in a regular meeting, we would undertake a motion to approve the strategic plan as a whole, but including that change.
I think that's a great idea, Mr. Mayor, and if it works for the council, what I'll do is we'll get changes tonight. I'll send the draft around before the May 5th meeting, so that at that meeting, we can have a chance to find out if we're comfortable before it would go to the regular meeting on the 12th, since we do have a number of additional meetings.
Councillor Bain?
Saying I support that approach to it.
Okay, thank you. One change, sorry, Councillor Carver, did you?
Oh, yeah. Do we need a motion, or are we okay the way it is?
I think
Going
we're
with the
doing this
consensus.
part by consensus,
Okay,
and then the plan would be massaged based on that consensus. And at the 5th of May meeting, we would be presented with the new plan. Okay, Councillor O'Neill?
Point of clarification, will this be decided by consensus or by majority?
My suggestion on that would be that tonight I do a draft based on consensus. And then on the 5th, if that
becomes a
draft
regular motion.
requires modification, you could use the motion at that point.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Do we agree on that change suggested by Councillor Carver? Okay. And one that I had hoped we would be able to make in the interest of our citizens is in our core value, which says our shared beliefs, behaviors, and attitudes that guide town councilors in the employee in the delivery of services to our community. I would like to make it the timely services to our community. Insert the word timely. So it's not ultra specific in saying it has to be done or something needs to be done within 30 or 60 or 90 days, but the notion of timely delivery becomes part of our effort.
I'd support that.
I can support that.
Mhm.
Deputy Mayor, Councillor Now, Councillor Feeney,
Support.
Councillor O'Neill. Okay, CAO will add the word timely delivery services as well. Does anyone have anything else?
Mayor, just some clarification around the housing section where there's some notation about removing the clause. What is the thinking? Just want to make sure I'm on the same page of the thinking of removing that section. Just let me refresh my memory on which section that is.
Economic development, encourage a range of housing options.
I think that's it, Mayor.
Yeah.
It is hard to follow. Maybe it's page
It's in 3.2.
3.2. I think that's what I was referring to.
Fifth or sixth item in that list,
Yes.
3.2.
Yeah, just so what was the thinking about removing that section? Is there Dylan, is there a rationale behind why we want to do that? I'm sure there is, if that's the recommendation. I wasn't just a little out of the loop on that one.
Yeah, so essentially that's a note on this action, which is the only action that we have about housing in the strategic plan.
Mhm.
And we did talk about, had a special meeting earlier in the year in January, I think, for the purpose of considering some actions. We looked at a range of actions from other areas, different options that are out there. And we discussed the idea that maybe council would want to insert some specific housing direction here. But at the current time, this one does not have any actions associated with it, essentially, to the extent that we do have an ongoing action of explore affordable housing opportunities through various housing groups and agencies, which, like in terms of a strategic plan, there's really no action there to ever update because there's no timeline or anything.
Okay.
And with regards to the planning strategy review, that has been initiated. So at this point, I'm not sure that council necessarily thinks that the housing mix / investigate the viability of tiny homes in Mahone Bay is the top priority for that municipal planning strategy review. I know we've cited a lot of other housing related, development related considerations. So it's just revise or remove was my recommendation. I just feel that it's not, we didn't look at it last time, or we didn't amend it last time. And what's there doesn't give a whole lot in terms of direction on housing.
Councillor Carver?
Yes, two things. I would be happy to eliminate this very specific reference to the tiny homes because it's limiting in a way. And I wonder if saying that ensure that housing options are addressed in the municipal planning review would be useful.
Is that something that you would see actually stated in this strategic plan? Or would that become part of the operational plan or the directions on the review? You know, this is by design a high level document. If you were to say something like encourage a range of housing options or whatever verb you might choose, but it does really in that point allow for anything, whether it's tiny homes or it's infilling on existing lots or developing new subdivisions. From the town's perspective, we are encouraging literally any reasonable, quote unquote, housing options or opportunities for the town. I wouldn't see us getting specific in the strategic plan, but in lower level documents, yes. CAO, you were going to comment?
Well, I think that's a great summary, Mr. Mayor, of what this point is. And I guess what I was wondering is, does council see a value, and it very well may be the council does, in stating that point, encourage a range of housing options, if, as you just elaborated, it really doesn't give any kind of direction as far as a strategic direction to that review or in general to our planning regime.
Well, I think that's an improvement. I think when I read the clause, I thought the intent was to eliminate housing from the agenda completely within the strategic plan. So I take your point that within the high level document, we may not need to be specific. And but I do think we have to have references to improved housing options as part of our long-term plan.
And the review of that long-term plan will have to support the actions that flow from this. We can't say that in the strategic plan and then have a bylaw that says, no, you can't do that, right? We have to, in the spirit of that strategic element, we have to look at our, how we are encouraging housing through our bylaw structure or our municipal planning strategy.
And on that
Totally
note,
agree with that.
go ahead. Yeah, if you leave the action, encourage a range of housing options in the strategic plan, it's high level. And if council's comfortable with that being a very broad kind of direction, then underneath it, where you do have the two actions listed, one of them being just maintain membership with Social Housing Coalition, essentially, that's fine. The other one being the tiny homes, the Councillor Carver's suggestion, if we remove the reference to tiny homes, that action essentially becomes, instead of referencing and investigate the viability of tiny homes, it just says review permitted uses in the land use bylaw rehousing mix, which, you know, if it's under the action, encourage a range of housing options, well, very general, it does at least associate the investigation of housing options with the plan review, which is a thing that we have a timeline for, that is happening. And I think as far as the strategic plan, it is important to put some action on a particular action, that's what they're called, if we're going to list it. So that might be a change, just removing the wording around tiny homes. And you can also consider if there's a missing strategic focus under housing, rather than adding it in the strategic plan, you could add a third action in the action plan. So while we have the plan review and we have participation on Jack as an ongoing entity, there could be a third option there. We have talked about a number of things, from affordable housing to land trusts. If there's anything that anyone wants to suggest, either now or well, I'd prefer it be now anyway, but it could be on the 5th, I suppose, by motion. Could bring it up now, that we could add another one there without changing the top level action in the strategic plan. So that's just a thought.
Anyone?
There was a lot there. I think I support what he said.
Sorry, I can put that on the screen if it would help. I'm not sure because I'm referring to it very visually, but I know I have it in front of me.
Put it on the screen if you would, CAO.
Okay, I'll just do it briefly. Okay. All right. So unfortunately, of course, we get it on the screen and it comes right on a page break, so that's real difficult to look at. So essentially, we've got on the side of the page, you've got encourage a range of housing options. So that's the top level from the strategic plan. And if we leave that unchanged, then underneath it, we have explore affordable housing opportunities through various housing groups and agencies, which, as I said, is the Social Housing Action Coalition membership there. But then the other one, if we were to delete, and I think this was Councillor Carver's suggestion, the words investigate viability of tiny homes in the town of Mahone Bay, and this would simply say review permitted uses in the land use bylaw housing mix, and then would still be able to be associated with the plan review. And I can shift the asterisks here forward to represent this fiscal year for the plan review. And then if council wishes to consider another action, if there's anything specific that isn't covered here, you could just add a third action here, similar to these ones. It would just be a third action underneath encourage a range of housing options. So that's only if someone has a suggestion there. Otherwise, perhaps the first thing would be, do people concur with the change that I've construed as Councillor Carver's suggestion? Penny, I'm not sure if you agree that that's what you were suggesting.
I think so. Yes.
So CAO, can you give us the wording that will be in that action? Review permitted uses in the
Review permitted uses in the land use bylaw rehousing mix is how it would read if we just delete the remainder about tiny homes.
yes.
And that could be made more specific if anyone wants to suggest anything, what we're reviewing for. You know, it could cite things there like affordability, it could cite density, it could make those references, but you know, in the current term, I'd assume all of those things are within that.
Yeah, no, I think that would be the right way to go.
Do you want to just do your usual, see if everybody else agrees, and then
Yeah.
I'll...
You want to close that one so we can see everybody on the, there we go, here's everybody. So everyone agrees?
Yeah.
Good-o. We'll have that change installed as well. Anything else for that? Councillor Carver?
Not for that one, but I'm out down onto the governance and public engagement.
Yes.
Now I have to find it. Which number is it? Is it? I'll tell you what I wrote down. The whole section is vague to me. Do we need a section on the MJSB? And those were my main comments.
Okay. I'm just looking for the item,
Yeah.
Councillor Carver.
Why is it so hard to find?
Your page 22 is the beginning of governance and public engagement, I think, if that's what you're looking for.
Page 22. Governance structure for effective decision-making. Councillor Carver, did you find your,
No, I'm still struggling. Sorry.
okay?
Oh, there we go. Well, do we need a section on the MGSB, the Municipal Joint Services Board?
Hmm.
So there is a reference to, I think, to the MJSB under the service delivery under 3.1. So I guess it would be with respect to the governance of the MJSB if there's a reference here.
Okay, it's under service. Okay, it's under service delivery. Okay.
Okay,
I think that's all then. Thank you.
okay, thank you, Councillor Carver. Anyone else? I can't see Councillor O'Neill if she's gonna raise her hand or.
Oh.
Councillor Bain?
I think it's fine, just the way it's written.
Okay. Councillor Carver?
Yes, under the creating opportunities for public engagement. So we've said utilize newsletter, website, public meetings, etc., to increase public engagement. Could we add an item that says evaluate the effectiveness of our public engagement activities?
Councillor Bain?
I don't think that's really necessary because we would end up evaluating the newsletter. We'd be evaluating everything. I think we can take it as its word and see what the results are and proceed from there.
I mean, we do seek feedback via the surveys from time to time. Whether that's, I don't think we would consider that, completely scientifically evaluating, but we do seek to understand if our plan has positive impact, and how it's thought of.
Yeah. I appreciate that Councillor Feeney. My only concern right now, after the last, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, from the point of view of engaging the public, I'm not sure if we're using the right methods to reach the citizens in the town. Yes, we go on Facebook. We've got the town website. We've got the mayor's newsletter. There's a number of different modalities that we use to reach people, but obviously there are quite a few folks that still aren't hearing it, or they're not tuned in, or they're not aware that something is going on. Look at the response in the last week or so for the transportation study. Even though I counted probably a dozen opportunities to send out the word that the survey was, that the plan was being developed, the public meetings were being held, the opportunity to comment was there, a large number of people still were not aware. So possibly by evaluating our communications, as Councillor Carver is suggesting, we may develop an awareness, a greater awareness of what's going on with our communications. who is not hearing from us? Deputy Mayor?
I think we're doing more than we have done in any other council since we have gone live.
Yes.
The newsletters go out. I don't know who goes to the post office, but a lot of those do not go home. You know, they're thrown in the box.
Garbage cans
I don't
full.
think we could do any more. All our meetings are public. They're posted everywhere in town. They're online. They're on the website. They're on Facebook. I think we're doing more than enough. I think the citizens have to step up and be more engaged. I think we're doing all we can do. And I think I have to agree with Councilor Payne, engage in doing the survey after we have a public meeting is a waste of staff time. I don't know what you do unless you call everybody that lives in Mahone Bay, and that's more staff time taken up. So I think we're doing a fantastic job. We had a little viral conversation at 5 o'clock tonight with a group of our friends, and the transportation report came out. Well, most of the group didn't know it happened. You know, and I explained what had happened with it. Well, I didn't know about it. Well, I said it's on Facebook. It's on our webpage. It's in the post office. It's in the town hall. I mean, you have to take a little responsibility. I was not probably the most popular guy at a little viral talk tonight. But anyway, we're doing our job. I just don't know, for the handful or more that don't seem to get it. I'm sorry. I agree with John. We're doing all we can do. That's my opinion.
Councillor Carver?
Yes, I think the deputy mayor's comments that there are so many people who have not received the message or just flies below their radar. That's exactly the reason why it would be useful to review what it is that we're doing and what's happening, why people are missing the information. It's very it's complicated and it's very common. I don't think it would take a lot of staff time to assess or evaluate. We're not asking for a big scientific study, but to constantly review it, to add an item that would be to have an ongoing review of how well our public engagement efforts are working.
We see how many we get out at public engagement seminars. Not a very small
Councillor
crowd.
Freeman, do you have a comment?
Mayor, I know later in the agenda, we're spending some time talking about the communications package and kind of maintaining that into next year. You know, I view the reaction to our efforts in community engagement to really dovetail with the communications package. I mean, they're not the same, but they're you know, inextricably linked. You know, I take the point about evaluating how effective our communications from council is, you know, maybe that is a worthwhile objective. Maybe not on a case-by-case basis, but at a portfolio level, you know, does the town's communications strategy work? So I don't know if we need to, you know, denote that in the strategic plan, or maybe that would be something, to Councillor Carver's point, we can specifically require out of the communications package. So maybe that analysis should be a base level piece of work within the context of the communications plan. You know, spending the money on the communications plan with no ability to ascertain whether it's effective strikes me as we could, you know, as we're spending a lot more money than we ever have before in that area, it would be worthwhile knowing if we're getting what if it's effective. How does the community respond to this effort? We are spending the money. The question is, does spending the money have any value? And that's, you know, I think that's kind of getting to the point of where Councillor Carver is as well.
CAO, you were next up.
Yeah, just because I think there's two different things arguably being proposed. The evaluation of a contract, obviously something we should do with respect to that specific contract or any specific contract, and we should do that in closed session. But the discussion around, you know, much broader, is our communications effort reaching the public? We can't pin that on contract on one provider, which is, generally for the development of creatives materials. There's a lot more going on over many years. So I do see the value in council periodically assessing the effectiveness of communications, whether that is something that maybe it's part of the annual strategic plan review. I'm not sure if it's a strategic plan action unless something specifically is being asked of staff. Probably making the time to have a conversation amongst council members and looking for opportunities to improve our communications in the coming year. That's very valuable, and I'm not sure if it's a mechanism or just taking the time.
Okay, Counselor now. Can't hear you, Counselor. You're on mute. Okay,
There.
there you go.
Yeah. My point is that we can assess, but how do we really evaluate it? Especially if it seems that the public aren't engaged enough really to look at these things. I mean, the work is out there. We send the mayor's newsletter, and if a lot of them end up in the trash bin at the post office, then how do we get that word across if the public doesn't really have the, maybe not interest, but forethought to really see these things and take an interest into it?
Good point. Anyone
Yeah.
else?
I think the deputy mayor said that this has been a significant effort, moving forward, doing more. And maybe it is something to Councillor Now's question. Maybe it is something that over time residents get used to knowing where to look. They get used to expecting a value in those interactions if we really are looking for their opinions. So it may also be consistency and not expecting the residents to just get used to it overnight and start realizing that we really are looking for their input in a lot of really profound ways. But we will continue to, and hopefully they'll start to get more used to it and participate more.
So are you suggesting on the one hand that if council with the support of staff have taken the right efforts or extenuating efforts to publicize an issue and the citizens will choose to ignore it, the council will not respond when a delegation shows up at the door?
I'm
Stating
certainly
that
not
they
not
didn't hear
suggesting
about
that
it?
at all. I'm just suggesting that if council continues to be consistent and uses all the options at their disposal, that hopefully these kind of issues that have come up in the past few months where people were unaware until quite a bit after something had already been introduced and there had been opportunities for comment, in particular the transportation plan. And I do think COVID has played a role, but I also think that people get more used to paying attention to our social media and our website and looking for those bulletins and reading your newsletters. There's a lot of stuff in them. And this is a live meeting, so if anybody's watching, hopefully we're encouraging them to check in.
There you go. Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
So I have, I'm not sure where we are in terms of the evaluation of the strategic plan, but there were a couple of items where staff were recommending a change. If there's an opportunity before we move off the item, and I don't know if we're there, I'd just like to run through those to see if anyone agrees that we should.
Sure.
Thank you.
Please.
So the first one was with respect to emergency services. We noticed, as we were talking about MJSB earlier, MJSB is in there, but emergency services and REMO generally not reflected. And the thought from staff, there was a suggestion that we could add a goal around provision of emergency services and speak to REMO and potentially speak to Code Red, community resiliency efforts, if council wants those referenced, the fire service, hydrant services. Essentially, we're just missing a goal around emergency management. And right now, I think it would be particularly relevant to put that in there.
Okay. Comments? Councillor Carver?
I support that.
Okay. I was talking with staff today, CAO, about the unfortunate situation in northern Nova Scotia and the issues they're having around who was communicating notices or warnings and when. And after talking with staff today, although I think of these things can always be reviewed, but I think we have a process in hand in conjunction with the RCMP that would allow us to do that kind of a notice, but I have no issue with mentioning those or adding those elements that you've mentioned.
I think council's done a lot in the last few years in terms of emergency, and I think including ensuring Remo is well resourced. And so it seems to me that it belongs in your strategic plan.
Council is an emergency all by itself, CAO. Don't have to go any further.
So if you feel that that one has consensus to be in the draft, oh, go ahead, Richard. Sorry.
No, just wanted to say that, yeah, I think it's a good idea to put emergency services in there.
Okay. Agreed?
Yeah.
Agreed. Okay.
Now,
Did you have
as a
another one?
follow-up, yeah, well, just as a follow-up to that one, it's definitely council's decision whether this would make sense or not, but we could add a completely new emergency section and we could not change anything about the current section under facilities management. But just to make reference to that section under facilities management, it references the completion of a public engagement process and issuance of an RFP for the fire station project. And we've essentially gone up to the point of completing that project, or at least everything that's written down in a strategic plan, which only takes us up to beginning the project. So I'm wondering if we should fold that under this emergency services and essentially just have an action there that says ensure the fire station. I'll think of some wording around it, but rather than a bunch of specific goals that speak to things that are now behind us. Wondering if maybe we just move it under the new emergency section and make reference to the fire station project like at a high level.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Deputy Mayor, agree? Everyone agrees? Okay, make the change, sir.
Thank you. So the next one, I think everyone will agree to as well. In terms of the goal to, I think it says meet and exceed standards for water wastewater treatment. We had a suggestion to add the issue of wastewater effluent, which we've talked about for a bit in the past year and staff have been working on, and it's in the budget. That would be trying to dechlorinate the effluent from the waste treatment process. As a specific action there, I'd say it's one of the more significant actions that we have on our horizon in terms of that goal of meeting standards.
Yeah. I would agree with that, CAO. Comments? Deputy Mayor, you're agreeing?
Agree.
Okay, all in favor? Okay.
Thank you. The next one, oh, Councillor Carver has her hand up. Is that just to agree?
No, it was to go back to the item under facilities management, where you had suggested in the green box, consider retitle or addition of actions about the town hall or public works in 2021.
I guess that's getting some echo. I think that's as an alternative there. That was presented. Now we're at a place in our budget where I feel like it might be, it would be a bit of an overstep for me to suggest the council want to make any reference to those projects in this at that time. But certainly if you want to, it is an opportunity to kind of put that out there in the horizon that there is a need to make an effort in terms of continuation of town hall or
Yeah, I would support putting that in under facilities management.
Okay, what page is that on, Councillor Carver?
Unfortunately, I'm not seeing page numbers, so that's why I floundered around in here. It's up near the top.
Yeah, it's the very first one in the action plan. I think it should be page 9.
Very first one in the action plan. Facilities management.
So in the green section.
Yeah.
So it just noted that the only actions were in relation to the fire station project. And so one way of dealing with that is, of course, we talked about putting the fire station project in with the other emergency stuff. But then this is a question of, is there other facility stuff And, you know, the current budget, as some of you have maybe had a chance to review all the documents, I don't want to presume it's a 99-page document there, but it does make reference to renovation of the town
Yeah,
hall
it
still.
does. It does.
And I just don't know if it would be, you know, maybe that's something we revisit on the 5th after we've had some additional budget conversations.
That would be my inclination, just to
Yeah.
let it go until we finalize the budget chat. I mean, this provides for an initiative anyway, but possibly after the budget discussion, we would be able to make it more specific. But I would be reluctant to do it now and possibly tie our hands in the budget discussion.
I mean, I agree with you. I think we're better off having as much flexibility as possible, given the conversations later this week. And I think we have a whole, you know, we'll have a whole accessibility conversation as well down the road. And obviously that making sure that all of our facilities meet the long-term accessibility requirements is going to be in a future version of the strategic plan.
Okay.
So no consensus on that for right now. Councillor Carver, are you okay if I move on to the next one?
Yes, thank you.
So this next one might not be quite as simple as the last. I just wanted to call council's attention to down under economic development. We have a specific action speaking to the development of a economic development strategy. It's the goal is define the framework for an economic development strategy. It's on page 15, and it has specific actions under it. And those actions do include, and I'm particularly looking at the last one, adopt economic development strategy. And that is scheduled for the end of this year. I will say that at the current time, we have not proposed funds for external services around that in the budget. I do not believe that we at the committee level are in a position to deliver within this year on a strategy without significant external support. So I think perhaps just removing that action, you don't have to change the goal. But certainly I currently do not see us achieving that unless additional resources are allocated.
Okay.
I'll agree with Dylan's suggestion there, because as you know, we have a lot of projects on the go right now that we have consultants out working. And kind of scares me. I don't know where all the money's going to come to fulfill these things. I know a lot of them are in the budget and talking big bucks. So I think postponing that would not upset me at all.
Okay. Anyone else? Now, just in the last 6 weeks, the specter of COVID is crossing our paths. And from an economic development perspective, we may be looking at ways just trying to hang on to our existing businesses without trying to support a strategy to expand our economic position. So I would be inclined to agree with the CAO. Councillor O'Neill, you're from an economic development committee perspective, did you have a comment?
I suppose I was just thinking that our strategy wouldn't necessarily need to include expanding businesses, but supporting the existing ones, to your point. I have no particular concern with removing this as an action. As the CAO just said, the item will still remain.
Okay, Councillor Bain, you're the committee chair. I'll turn your mute off, John. Lower left-hand corner.
Okay now?
Yep.
Okay. No, I agree with what's been said, not necessarily to delete it, but not to attempt to action it under the circumstances.
Well, of course, if we leave it there as opposed to deleting it, it shows as an element that wasn't actioned. Perhaps we can defer it until the next fiscal period.
Well, that would that would work. We
Okay.
can always delete it and bring it back.
Yeah,
Well, in the high level, the framework setting for a plan, that still does refer, as Councillor O'Neill said, it does still refer to the idea that you're working towards a strategy. It just
Mhm.
doesn't pin us to a specific expectation this year.
Yeah. Thank you, CAO. So agreed? Okay. Do you have another one, Mr. Hyde?
I have one more.
One more.
Down at the very end, we've got the shoreline project under adaptation. I know it's still in the budget, and I'm hoping we'll hear some great news about funding, but I'm not, I'm not not necessarily thinking that it will be moved forward this year. And you'll notice that specifically the action that was defined was council makes decision and authorizes staff to prepare RFPs. And that was supposed to happen now, essentially, but we of course haven't gotten external funding confirmation. So I'm suggesting maybe you leave everything in there and just push the expectation around when an RFP would be issued by a year, to the third quarter of this year. And that at least says to the federal and provincial governments that, at least for the moment, we would do the project if we receive the funding. I'm not inclined to suggest removing it, because that does suggest that we're no longer willing. And I think it's more about the external resources.
I agree.
Mm.
Sounds good to me. Everyone? Okay, done.
All right, that was all of my notes. Thanks, everybody.
Okay,
Great.
it's 8.
So I made these notes. I'll bring a draft on this basis to in the May 5th package.
Yes, please. Thank you. Do we want to go now? Are we going to follow this in order, or did you want to jump to a more critical issue?
If you're asking me in that regard, I think of the next few, most of them are for information. The 2020 municipal elections does have a fairly time-sensitive recommendation. So I guess my suggestion, if it's being solicited, would be to jump down to that one. But I don't want to eliminate time for the strategic communications contract. I guess the question is, do we want to move that forward by a meeting if we run out of time tonight?
Municipal election strategy? All right, let's go to that one.
All right. So there's obviously a lot of uncertainty, as I've laid out in there. And I think everyone knows, around the municipal elections that are scheduled for October. So there is an action that is recommended that we would need to take. And I'm essentially recommending this action at this time, with the thought that we would revisit by June, at which time we should know whether there is an election. And if there is going to be an election, it gives us an opportunity to think about how an election would look in the context of having just come out of heavy COVID precautions. We presumably will have a lot of distancing and other considerations still in place for an election. So the thought here is that we appoint Maureen so that we have a returning officer, but there are very few duties of the returning officer between now and June. And then we revisit this item. The budget's in there, as you see in the budget, and the thought would just be to wait for provincial direction, essentially.
Okay.
Also move that we appoint Maureen Hughes as our returning officer.
We
Second.
can't do motions, Deputy
All
Mayor.
right, sorry.
Okay, if we agree to it, it will show up at a
Yeah,
future.
on the
Oh,
next meeting.
no, that's not true. In the discussion of the strategic plan, we weren't taking motions, but you guys can do motions. We're in a special meeting.
Okay, I will so move.
Okay,
Second.
Councilor O'Neill seconds it. Did you want to talk about the electronic voting business, CAO? I notice in the documentation that staff are investigating the options.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to it. Sorry, I'm trying to keep notes on the, I'm going to be able to go back to the recording, which is helpful, but I'm also trying to keep notes on the motion since I said that Maureen didn't need to join us tonight. So what I was going to say about the e-voting, the thought there, obviously I think it's always worth exploring options in terms of elections, but specifically, if there is going to be an election in October on the original schedule, and if we are looking to provide the maximum range of options for people who are still trying to avoid the risk of possibly contracting COVID, it will still be around to some extent. We could be looking at the HRMs currently exploring e-voting for advance polls. I'll say we did e-voting by advance polls in Shelburne when I was there. It does provide a lot of opportunity for people in the 2 weeks prior to the election who maybe have mobility issues or otherwise, are concerned about having to go out, in public to participate in a one-day process. It does provide a lot of additional options. As noted recently in the paper, HRM is not using e-voting for election day. But I will say that the use of e-voting in Shelburne during the advance polling, we had about half of our ballots cast by the time we actually got to election day. So if you're trying to reduce the number of people in terms of crowding, then that may be an effective tactic. So it's essentially, I think, of more value to consider if we perceive an election in October and we're still undergoing some COVID precaution.
Councillor Now?
Yeah, should we vote on Deputy Mayor Dawes's motion first?
Oh, we can if you'd like to.
Well, I'm just saying, we haven't voted on it yet.
This kind of grew out of it, but so we'll go back to the deputy mayor's motion. It's been moved and it's been seconded. All in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go back to the e-voting. Councillor Bain, your mute is on. Okay,
Yeah, well, we just decided that Maureen would be returning officer. I think we can leave it there and talk about options and e-voting when the time gets closer to seeing where we're going with it. I think to discuss it now is probably just taking up some time that may not be relevant. We realize that e-voting does take place and there will be options. The provincial government may tell us what we're going to do and what our options are. And I think Maureen is very capable of communicating those items to us without a lot of discussion
thank you.
in April.
So we'll leave it in the hands of the deputy of the clerk. And the clerk will return to council for a decision on the notion of e-voting.
Well, and I think in general on whether the appointment of an external returning officer
Yes.
for the election period would still be recommended.
Yeah. The last election, the council of the day prior to opted to go with hiring a returning officer, and the people who were at the polls were not employees of the town either. However, so we're finished with that one. Let's go to the next one. What about the draft greenhouse gas reduction action plan?
Yeah, that is the only other one that has recommendations that are not for information, although I will say that the recommendations are already reflected in the draft budget just because of the timing of the two things. So we sent that out before this meeting. But there, I guess I will say to introduce it, if council wants to get into it, I do have some comments. So my suggestion would be that this would be the next priority item, but I won't speak to it further unless council concurs that that would be the best use of time.
And can we leave this item to our budget discussions, Mr. Hyde?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly could. All of the remaining three items are they're for the budget discussions. The difference here with GHG one is that it's phrased as having recommendations to council. The recommendations are largely reflective of, slightly changed from what we put on the capital investment plan last fall. And so the budget documents have been updated to reflect these recommendations. I think that if council supports the recommendations, it would be it would be kind of good to get a motion to refer them to budget, which is all that the recommendation was to do, is
Okay.
to refer them to budget.
I would move that these items are referred to budget.
I'll
Okay,
second that.
seconded by Councillor Carver. This motion recommends or approves the recommendations that have been made from council's perspective, but it does not commit us to accepting or rejecting any one or all of them in the budget discussion.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And for clarity, I had Councillor Bain as the seconder, but I think you said Councillor Carver. So what should I put down?
Well, I noticed Councillor Carver first. Councillor Bain just kind of sits over there in the wilderness.
Okay, you
Fine.
acknowledge Councillor Carver, so that's what I'll put.
Councillor Bain doesn't have an objection.
No, not at all.
No.
Let's just keep moving.
Okay, I wouldn't want you to lose sleep, John. Councillor Carver.
So we're still in discussion on the motion, and I have a question I'd like to ask about the process from now with the greenhouse, with this report. And should that be within this discussion now, or wait till we've had our vote?
Oh, well, so procedurally, I guess it could be either. I could respond to the question now, or we could have the vote.
I think we should have it now.
And Mayor, just to clarify, this vote is just referring this information to budget deliberations.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's it.
to refer and then list those 4 projects to budget deliberation.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Carver.
Yes, I simply would like to have, to hear the clear outline of what happens now with this report in terms of information, decision-making, public engagement, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. So as it's outlined there, it's a lot to read. And so hopefully people will, if you haven't had a chance, get to read the whole draft report that Catherine's been working on. But essentially her project that we got low carbon communities funding for is to develop this plan, and it's meant to be developed on the basis of completing some baseline inventories of emissions. So we participated through the federal program, through FCM program, Transition 2050, to get external assistance with those baselines, and it should be a good value, but it's also been a slow process. We submitted them everything they were looking for last fall, and our expectation is now, especially with COVID, they've had some further delays. I don't want to say I expected it because they were already delayed, but so what we're looking at now is the end of May to receive that from them, I believe. And then Catherine will work on that, plus the input we're getting from our survey, which I think we're now up to about 11% of all of the households in Mahone Bay have responded. So it's continuing to plug away. The higher number that gets to, the better we can refine the baseline data on that specific feedback. And then that will further inform this plan. So fill out a lot of the assumptions that we've made based on Nova Scotia data, which is all we really have to work on. And then the draft plan. So, you know, this is the first initial draft, the draft plan that will be presented to council for approval. This is just a preview so that you can see the budgetary impacts. That would be presented to council by September. It really does depend, unfortunately, on some of those external inputs, but it would be presented to council by September, which is the kind of the end of the current project that Catherine is employed under. And then if at that time council wants to put that draft out for consultations, what I would expect, then, you know, we'll have to consider the timing of that around the election. So if the election is when it is, then you may not be able to complete consultations until after the election. If the election were delayed, then maybe you'd move right into consultations on the draft plan. But I think that it will be September before we have the final draft that would be recommended for public consultation, I guess I could say.
Do you see monies actually being expended in fiscal year 2020, 2021 on this project?
Well, so the project to develop the plan is the project that we got funding from last year. So that's continuing until September. In terms of the new recommendations, that's what those 4 that we just referred to budget. So 3 of them are capital. And if council is inclined, then we'll get into them. But essentially with the solar garden, if we're continuing with that project, we've been talking about it for a long time, and we made some indications that we are. And we've certainly done a lot of work with area and with the landowner, and et cetera. The talk is that that project would either break ground this fall or next spring. So there's a potential certainly that we'll, if it's approved, we'll be incurring some costs this year, whether it's actually to have the facility on, on the ground. I'm not sure in 2021. There are a few factors there, areas still working on, and it is external funding dependent. So we understand the Department of Energy is fairly eager to fund these projects, but
Okay.
will essentially be dependent on when they give that confirmation. And as you know, our portion at the 27% that the utility, or that the town would rather would cover, would actually be debt ratio exempt based on the funding, or sorry, the sale of the power to the utility. So the utility would essentially guarantee the purchase of the power that was being generated, which is what we've done with Eller's House. So that project would be outside of the normal debt ratio for borrowing.
Okay. So,
And then, oh, go ahead.
the plan, of course, will include the opportunity to engage and consult with the citizens before any final decision is taken to proceed with the solar garden, or any other aspect of this plan for that matter.
Oh, but that's really at council's discretion. Like, staff normally in a budget approval, seek approval to proceed with the projects if there is an expectation that the project might not proceed at all. Then council would need to be very clear about what those expectations are before we do. The current plan calls for public consultation around the solar garden next fall. That's focused on the investment opportunities, public participation opportunities. It's not really about not proceeding to do the project as utility scale development. The business case for the utility to do the project is really for council to evaluate. So I guess my answer to that would be, if council is not serious, and I've assumed that we have been about the solar garden, then please identify that engagement as soon as possible, and we'll undertake it. Because my understanding is, if these projects are in the budget, then we are planning to proceed with them. We're not still saying that they're pending a future decision. They may be informed by or benefit from consultation, but I guess that's my response to that question.
Councillor Fee?
Mayor, so I'm certainly willing to support the motion when we get there, but I can't help but think how reminiscent this is of where we were a little over a year ago, when we aligned our capital program with the hopes and expectations that large, substantially subsidized projects were going to be forthcoming. And the net result of that was that almost no substantial capital investments were made last calendar year. Now, we're probably better off because of that, and maybe and certainly, Luke can talk to the positives that came out of those capital deferrals. But if there's an expectation that there's going to be decisions made on Thursday that is going to prioritize capital projects to this magnitude, in the absence of even a letter from the federal or provincial government saying that that money has a very, very high percentage chance of coming to fruition,
Yeah.
then I think that's asking council to a lot to go in with blind faith that the provincial and federal government are going to step up to that level of funding. That we're talking millions of dollars of expected funding from these sources, and given the environment and where we were a year ago, where promises were made but promises weren't kept. What do they say about, you fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice. So that's very much on my mind about building a capital program that's so leveraged to other people making decisions with no idea when they're going to make it, and those decisions tying our hands for real projects that we really could get started. So I'm not making a comment on the virtues of the underlying project, but it's not necessarily our money. The vast majority of this money, to the CAU's point, is someone else's funding.
Mm.
So I just don't want to be in a situation where we're making a decision that is a done deal on Thursday night or Friday night or Saturday morning or next week, and having no idea if these other funding sources are going to come together. Because my expectations for federal and provincial government money is, considering they just put $200 or $300 billion out there to save society, I have my doubts how much infrastructure money is going to get funded this calendar year. But anyway, I am prepared to support the motion.
And
Good
just for
point,
clarity,
sir.
as usual, that would be, we're confirmed on the project pending the external funding.
Yeah,
So what I'm saying is that council is not going to be the one that if we get the external funding says, no, we heard from some people on Facebook and we're not interested anymore.
Well,
So
right.
it's more about council's willingness if you get the external funding. I'm certainly not suggesting that this project would proceed in the absence of external funding. I think that would be a real rethink.
Okay, now, hold on, Councillor Feeney. Councillor Bain was next.
Well, what I'm agreeing with Councillor Feeney on this one, because there may be some funding coming, much reduced, and we may have to rethink the whole thing.
Mm.
So to say we are committed to it, I'll disagree with that right now.
Okay. Anyone else? Councillor Feeney?
Just one last point, Mayor, and then we can move along. We made some very substantial appropriations last budget cycle with the hopes that the federal government and the provincial government programs would come together. The shoreline remediation program, for example, not only which was millions and millions of dollars and would have been an excellent project. And I think it would have been a project the council would have been happy to support based on the percentages, and council unanimously supported that. But that decision tied our hands and locked us into being in a position where we had to make sure that we had our part of the component of the funding. And time has marched on. Like, that was 15 months ago that decision was made. All I'm suggesting today is, I mean, if the decision is we're going to have to make a decision today, but everyone else, and we have to put our money in the bank today, but everybody else gets to wait a year or 15 months down the road before they make their decision. I just don't know if we can play that game this year. Anyway, you get the point.
Thank you. Any other comments? We have a motion on the floor, I believe.
Yeah, and this was the motion to refer these items to budget. We get a little preview of the budget conversation, but
That's right.
we vote on this, we can pick it up
So
at the.
we are referring this report, or we're accepting the report, but we're referring it to the budget discussion.
The four specific recommendations, yeah.
Yes, that's right. All in favor? Okay, motion's carried.
And just quickly to reassure people, to Councillor Feeney's point, we're not making decisions on Thursday. Thursday is just the presentation, and then we have at least 2 more sessions. So, and we'll have more at people's discretion if we need to.
Okay, so that was greenhouse gas. Let's go to the transportation plan estimates.
So that report's just provided for information.
Sorry, may
yes.
I ask a question before we move on? I had my hand up, but
Councillor O'Neill, I didn't see you.
that's okay. It's just a point of clarification as to the process. So the conversations related to budget preparation are not public meetings or are public meetings. Can you just clarify which of those meetings are and are not public meetings?
All of these special meetings are public meetings.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll have to go into closed session for certain conversations, especially around contracts. And we have closed session scheduled tonight, but then my expectation would be we'd have a closed session on the 28th, and we could have another closed session on the 5th, being that there are certain parts of the budget that we'll need to discuss in closed session.
Thank you.
Councillor
Oh,
Kirby?
and personnel also, if we can have personnel in closed session too. I forgot about that.
Councillor Carter?
Yes, thank you. It's close to 90 minutes now, and I wonder if we could decide how we're going to use the rest of the time.
So just a suggestion, the last 2 reports are for information. You could either defer that being the transportation plan and the communications allocation. So you could either defer those onto the 28th, or sorry, the 23rd or the 28th, or you could accept them for information now. But that would remove your opportunity to have a discussion on them. So if you want to have a discussion on them, defer to either the 23rd or the 28th would be my suggestion.
Okay. We also have an in-camera session tonight. Councillor O'Neill?
Yeah, I would like to just suggest that we cover this and then move into the in-camera session. There was some concern as to being able to schedule meetings to cover all these topics so that everyone on council could attend. So I'm just going to propose that we cover them now.
So we'll do the transportation plan estimates now. Keep on plotting.
Mayor, in a similar spirit, I think I'd be prepared to make a motion to move the transportation package along to the budget for deliberation.
Okay. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Who seconded by the deputy mayor?
Just for clarity, we're only asking for you to accept this report for information because we didn't actually put all these projects in the capital budget.
Yeah, but some of the numbers are in the capital budget.
No, there's just a placeholder number right now, a $100,000 project for all of this.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
A placeholder number.
That's a taxpayer number.
Indeed. Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Councillor Carver.
Before we vote, again, I'd like to ask for a timeline. So we have these estimates for the transportation plan, and it's being referred to budget. Can you do the dates, because the public input is up until the end of this week. Then we have our budget discussions, and then the transportation report is coming to council after the budget discussions.
Yes, so I know it's a little bit confusing, but the idea here is that this is a process that's been going on for a long time through the Bicycle Nova Scotia work on the Blue Route and their report, and now the transportation plan. And there are certain items in this big picture that council has indicated are somewhat more priority. I'm thinking the intersection of Clearway and Main and the one-way street request for Cherry Lane. There may be others where council has indicated that there was a desire to potentially move on those projects in 2021. I'm sure the majority of these projects, if they were to end up being things that council were to approve in a transportation plan, would not be things that we'd be moving forward this year. So the thought is that council, during the budget process, will have the opportunity to identify priority areas, perhaps things within that very large discussion, and say, we would like to move forward on these in this year. And at least at that point, create a project concept consisting of whatever things potentially are the highest priority to council. And whether that actually moves forward to application to the Connect 2 program, which was my suggestion for external funding, you can submit that to a quick consultation process in May. But I wouldn't peg the whole consultation for the transportation plan on being able to pick something that could move forward this year. Because I know that last year there was some frustration around not moving forward on any of these recommendations. And I don't know that the entirety of the recommendations would need to be delayed at this point. That's council's discretion, but that's our suggestion at the staff level, because there are a few things that, have come up consistently and council has expected desire to act on them. And we have some recommendations on them now.
Councillor Carver.
Because I'm quite concerned about that sequence, and it's sort of breaking up the transportation plan proposals, their concepts, and they're only concepts at this point. And so you're asking us to be making budget decisions based on concepts that have been provided by the contractors. That just seems wrong. And we've just gone through a whole exercise of trying to explain to the public that this step is consultation, incorporating the public comments into the report that comes to council. Then there's a decision respecting and considering the public input. So the sequence just seems all wrong. I hear what you said about council being able to just to cherry pick out of the transportation report, but there's something inherently wrong in this for me.
Well, thank you. I just want to clarify that staff are not encouraging or suggesting the council go ahead with projects on transportation this year. We're just pointing out the opportunity to do so and the lack of an opportunity to do so if we continue with the consultation on the transportation plan into the fall. So this is an opportunity, and it's an external funding opportunity, and council can very well choose to pass it up and wait a year. That's not a recommendation from staff to jump into that. It's just an opportunity, and we wanted to identify it.
In given what Councillor Carver's comment, there's some value in the fact that it's very difficult to approve the plan when we haven't discussed the plan. But then that goes to the notion of a place card or placeholder, where if in the budget discussions, council was determined or intended to expend, pick a number, $30,000 for traffic improvements based on the traffic report that we've had done, that would give us the opportunity to earmark some money to support the plan that's been submitted. And then in the subsequent meeting, determine which elements council is prepared to actively support. If council's only prepared to paint one crosswalk, then the rest of the $30,000 that was place marked becomes available for other projects. But if we don't do that, then we've got to take the time to do this work up front before we get to the meeting on Tuesday. So.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Deputy Mayor? Old and wizened Deputy Mayor?
I have a lot of issues with this transportation thing we're putting together, and you know, I want to look at that seriously at budget time. My own personal opinion.
Would you want to do that serious look before we have the budget discussions?
No, I think I could make my point at budget time. My points.
Okay.
As I look through it, and I have a lot of concerns. As I spoke before, we have a lot of irons in the fire, and I don't know where the money's coming to do this. We have some big projects we're looking at, and we can't do everything that HRM does or Bridgewater, we can't do it all. And I'm really concerned where our finances are going to be this year and 5 years out. I have a lot of concern. We're talking big dollars in a lot of projects. And I think some of these transportations, there are some great ideas. There's some simple things we can do. That's not going to cost us a lot of money. But the blue route and that, to me, is a lot of money for what gain we're going to get out of it. People can cycle in this town. They use the trail. I haven't heard of anybody really getting hit by a car. And some of that plan, it's an expensive plan. And for us to implement that stuff, I don't know where the money's going to come from and how the town can afford to keep going with what we want to do. I have a lot of concern, and I have a lot of concern for other councils that are coming down the road. That's my own personal. I want to look at this budget very seriously and see which way we're going.
Okay. Anyone else? So, Mr. CAO, to your point, I think a placeholder number in a line item in the budget next Tuesday, and then we'll go through the transportation plan report, and we'll determine what, if any, council is prepared to support in 2021 or 2020, 2021.
No, that sounds great. I think we're still in discussion on the motion to do that, and then we can take that. And then I just wanted to note, you're very correct in characterizing that last point, which is that we are only trying to talk about, because we're still in the midst of plan development, council hasn't received the, hundreds of submissions we've gotten on our
No.
consultation. We are only trying to talk about the items council would want to prioritize. So when we do get to the budget discussion, my intention is not to go through all of the concepts and ask, are we doing this? My intention is for councillors to suggest what they've seen, whether it's from that, whether it's from the Blue Route, whether it's from transportation plan, whether it's just something their neighbor mentioned to them, that they would like in a 2021 transportation project. Just for clarity, because we want the benefit of hearing from all of the residents who have given their submissions. And so we should wait, as Councillor Carver said, to get that before we really go through and dissect all of that. And I think that for this one, this is a placeholder to do anything council wants to put in the 2021 budget. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. And yeah, we can take a motion or take a vote on this motion.
Okay. Councillor Carver?
I just want to register again my deep concern about having preempted the community input, even if it's for things. It preempted that opportunity for community input prior to making any decision on that plan.
Okay. Although we haven't seen the results of the opportunity afforded citizens to comment.
I beg to differ. We have seen lots of results on social media.
No, I'm looking for the ones that have actually been filed with town hall.
Yeah, we've had a tremendous amount of response. I would
I
consider
thought
it a
there
real, I would consider it a real slap in the face to the people who participate in the consultation if we prioritize what we're hearing on Facebook over all the people who have written considered responses.
Yeah. And of course, the people on Facebook may or may not be citizens of the town, which is an important issue. Councillor Carver, you don't agree?
Having referred to social media, I really hope that you're not assuming that I'm taking that as the totality of the community input.
Not at all.
I know that people are writing and we've encouraged them to write. And we are going to be, if we're making those decisions at budget discussions next week or early May, we're going to be bypassing some of that input.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor, I believe, to do just that.
We had a motion to recommend that placeholder for the budget discussions.
Yes.
And again, I think you can definitely take the perspective that by putting this placeholder there now, council's considering acting on some elements of transportation while the plan is under development. At the same time, we're acting on transportation every day. We deliver transportation services. And I think the worst thing would be that we just disregard the opportunity for comment. So we've created an opportunity for comment. It's going to take time. So you can't say, well, now we also want to make a decision next week and we want to have all that comment. Well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. We have to be able to continue to deliver quality transportation services and take the time to develop a plan. And I think that that's what council's working towards.
That being said, this motion in no way commits council to support any one notion in the plan.
No, but it's also not tying council's hands to act on transportation in 2021.
Council can say, thank you very much, and we'll get to it when we get to it, if that's the case. Okay. All in favor? Motion's carried. Okay. So that one goes to next week. I've got one computer on a mouse and the other one's on a touchpad, and I keep forgetting which one's which.
Mayor,
Okay.
would it make any sense to defer the other item around the communications package to the meeting on the 28th? Or would we rather go with Councillor O'Neill's point to just plow through?
Because there is actually that one and the budget estimates, which discusses like garbage receptacles and comfort stations. So maybe the two of those should be deferred.
How appropriate. The budget estimates got garbage receptacles in it. Okay. Motion or the suggestion's been made that we defer the communications contract and the project budget estimates to the 28th. Agreed? Okay. So I think that concludes the agenda except for the in-camera session. CAO, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So we will adjourn this meeting and we will go out of Zoom. The connection with citizens at YouTube will finish. And then we will go into an in-camera session on Teams. And CAO is going to send us a message to invite us to that. Councillor Carver.
I move that we go into closed session to discuss contract negotiations under MGA 22.2E.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Deputy Mayor, all in favor? Motion's carried. We will go in camera. See you on the other side.
So yes, as instructed, close this meeting down and expect me to call you on Teams